Hi everyone, David Aragona and Craig Milkowski here with our preview of the final leg of horse racing's Triple Crown, the Grade 1 Belmont Stakes, this year being run at Saratoga at the distance of 1.25 miles, so some changes for this historic race. Craig, we've got a group of 10 3-year-olds signed on for this race taking place as race 12 on the Saturday card at Saratoga. Earlier in the week, it seemed like this race could be run over a wet track. I think the forecast has brightened up a little bit, so we're expecting likely fast going for this Belmont Stakes, which is what everyone wants to see. This race competed over a fair surface, and among these 10 runners, does feel like the clear-cut favorite is going to be the number 9 Sierra Leone, who was the narrow loser in the Kentucky Derby, trying to avenge that loss to Mystic Dan here.
Yes, I'm really excited for this race. It's drawn quite the field. It's at Saratoga, which is kind of heaven on earth for us horse players. And I mean, couldn't ask for much more. We have the Derby winner, we have the Preakness winner, the favorites, the Derby runner-up, big field. So really looking forward to the whole card, but in particularly the Belmont Stakes.
Let's check out our TimeformUS pace projector for this Belmont Stakes. And I think we're going to have at least a contested pace up front, Craig, because we've got a few horses in this field that do want to attain forward position. I think first and foremost among them, the number 1 Seize the Gray, who was the gate-to-wire winner of the Preakness. Can't see why they would change up those tactics, especially with him drawing the rail. And the number 6 Dornoch, who was unable to get forward in the Kentucky Derby. I know the connections want him much closer to the pace this time.
Yes, you would think so. And I think Dornoch is the key to this pace projector, because if he doesn't go, I could envision a scenario where Seize the Gray's on the lead all by himself in the Preakness, which make him awful dangerous. And also, I mean, there's also the possibility that maybe he's just faster than Dornoch, because we haven't seen the early speed from Dornoch in the last couple races is what puts him up front. We look at the last 5 races, so you have to go back to get there. The 10 Mindframe, who's shown alongside, he's very likely raced, trying a new distance. I won't be surprised at all from his outside post. He's in more of a pace rating position than actually contesting that early pace.
If the pace does heat up, it would definitely benefit a horse coming from towards the back of the pack, like the number 9 Sierra Leone, who does get that LP flag, indicating he has the highest TimeformUS late pace rating in the field. Let's go through this group in post-position order, beginning with the Preakness winner, the number 1 Seize the Gray, and we'll take a look at the stretch run of that race. As you can see, this contested over a muddy racetrack, and looking back through his form, Craig, you could make the argument that wet tracks might move this horse up a little bit. He definitely competed well over some sloppy and muddy tracks at Saratoga last summer, got back on the wet going here and really seemed to relish the surface as he was able to hold sway through the stretch of this race. But I don't want to take too much away from his performance, because he did set some legitimate fractions before holding off the likes of Mystic Dan and Catching Freedom.
He sure did. And his race 2 back in the Pat Day Mile was good as well, where he was contesting a pace that was really fast. Kind of wisely was taken off of that by his rider Torres and made that late run. But this is a horse in good form. I don't think he needs a muddy track. I do think he needs to be on the lead, and I'm sure he's going to go. I can't imagine a scenario where Wayne Lukas would tell the rider to rate, given his inside draw. And I think he probably needs a good front-running trip to win. That last race is a little bit deceiving. He went fast, and it looks like he was pressured early. Imagination was way out in the track. It's not like he was breathing on him. So I kind of consider this a race where he was on a lone lead, and he may get it again. So I think he's a real contender in this spot.
That 123 TimeformUS speed figure is the highest number in this field coming into the race. The number 2 is Resilience. He's one of the also-rans from the Kentucky Derby. Finished a decent 6th in that race, and he actually ran pretty well within the context of the race, making an early move to vie for the lead at the top of the stretch before just flattening out in the late stages, maybe not getting the distance, also maybe moving a little bit early into what was the fast pace that did fall apart on Derby Day. And also, Craig, he covered a lot more ground than the winner, Mystic Dan, did.
He did, and I'll give a little spoiler alert here. I like this horse quite a bit in this spot. I think his Derby is way better than it looks. He lost ground. And to me, what's key is when he lost the ground. He was pretty wide when the pace was really hot early on and he was trying to keep up. Made what you said, I think, a little bit of a premature move, but he didn't really have much of a choice given the trip that he was getting. Didn't run too badly given everything that went against him in there. You see a very slight speed figure regression, but I'd argue he ran his best race in the Kentucky Derby. He's a horse who's been moving forward every time, and I'm looking for another step forward here.
The number 3 is the Kentucky Derby winner, Mystic Dan. And I think we talked about the Derby quite a bit at this point, Craig, and the trip he got compared to some others. He definitely deserves credit for racing as close to a fast pace as he did, because that was a race that really was dominated by horses that came from much further back in the pack than he did. And he got that lead at the mid-stretch marker and had just enough to hold on late over Sierra Leone and Forever Young. He came back in the Preakness, and while he repeated his TimeformUS speed figure of 118, I was a little disappointed in that performance because, once again, he got a very good trip and just couldn't reel and seize the gray.
Yeah, maybe you could give an excuse for the sloppy track a little bit. That does make it tougher on closers, but I'm a little concerned here. I thought he would run well in the Preakness, and he did. In this spot, I'm a little concerned that maybe they're just asking a lot of this horse to run in all 3 legs. His trainer, Ken McPeak, expressed some hesitation before actually running in the Preakness, thinking maybe the horse needed a little time. And now he's not getting any time here either after he decided to go in the Preakness. So this does not look like a horse ready to take a step forward for me, and I think that's what's going to be needed.
The number 4, the Wine Steward, is one of a trio of horses coming out of the Peter Pan Stakes, which is the local New York prep for the Belmont. Craig, he finished second that day. He's finished second in each of his last 3 starts after going 3 for 3 to begin his career, all sprint races as a 2-year-old. I think he's run well in the 2 starts so far this season, the Lexington and the Peter Pan. I didn't think he had much of an excuse to lose either of those races, and I question if he's really going to get better with added distance.
I gave this horse a really long look, being third off the layoff, having that good year-old form, kind of improving his speed figures gradually. So he looks like a horse ready to take another step forward to me speed figure-wise, but I share the same concern as you that I don't think he's really ready to do it at 1.25 miles, or maybe at a shorter distance or similar 1.16 miles, something like that. But I think this just may be a little bit too far for him.
Let's take a look at the stretch run of that Peter Pan as we discuss the winner of that race, the number 5, Antiquarian. And, Craig, this horse has only run 4 times, and he's been moving forward with each start. You could argue that he didn't have his best chance to be effective in the Louisiana Derby when he broke through the gate prior to the start, and maybe it was just a little flat thereafter that day. He did take another step forward to win this Peter Pan and finished up the race like at a distance is not supposed to be a big problem for him. I just think it's a question of whether or not you want anybody out of this race, and if you think this Peter Pan really stacks up against some of the Triple Crown events that others are exiting.
Yeah, I don't want to totally dismiss this guy. I mean, he ran a nice speed figure last time that fits in this field, and he did so well. He only has that one race where he didn't really show up, and he did have an excuse for that. And on top of that, the Louisiana trip here was a pretty strong one. So I don't want to totally dismiss him, but given the connections, I'm not sure he's going to offer a lot of value.
There are some also-rans coming back from the Kentucky Derby who skipped the Preakness into this Belmont Stakes. One of those is the number 6, Dornoch. And if you're looking for the horse that probably had the worst trip of anybody in the Kentucky Derby, I would say Dornoch is that candidate. I mean, he broke from the rail, which always spells trouble in the Kentucky Derby, got cut off actually by Mystic Dan in the opening furlong, was then ranked thereafter, more trouble, getting shuffled back past the half-mile pole, again encountered traffic at the steady at the top of the stretch. He just encountered trouble in every juncture of that Kentucky Derby, Craig, and you could argue that he actually did okay to beat half the field home, finishing 10th. The question with Dornoch is, has he really moved forward from his 2-year-old to 3-year-old season? Because we saw him defeat Sierra Leone in the Remsen Stakes last year by a nose, and he hasn't gotten much faster so far in his 3 starts as a 3-year-old.
You could also argue that that was over a fairly biased racetrack. I think there is some evidence of that. We show it in TimeformUS, and he was game that day, but he may have had some things going for him as well. And to me, he hasn't looked the same horse this year. Even his win in the Fountain of Youth, it was against a decimated field. That race was kind of a calamity as they got toward the gate and started getting scratches. Didn't run particularly well in the bluegrass. So something you brought up on our podcast, the TimeformUS forecast, was if that Kentucky Derby running line didn't exist, would I like Dornoch in here? And the answer is no. So I'm looking at him more as a pace factor. I think he really needs to go. All of his best races, as you can see in the PPs, come in races where he's went to the lead. So I think they need to scrap that strategy where he's kind of off the pace and just go.
Yeah, I'm skeptical of whether or not he can improve enough to win this race, but I do think he's going to run better than he did in the Kentucky Derby, and maybe that'll be enough to get a piece at a price. The number 7 is Protective. He is the maiden coming into this race. He's lost all 4 starts so far, but they're going to press on in stakes company with him, and I guess why not? He finished 3rd in the Wood Memorial, 3rd again in the Peter Pan last time. You know his owner, Mike Rapoli, loves to have horses in big races like this, so they're taking a shot with him. He definitely has to improve a little bit, Craig, but watching back that Peter Pan, he did have to wait for room a little bit at the top of the stretch before angling out. I don't think he was ever beating his stablemate Antiquarian. Maybe he would have made it closer for second that day, but he would have done so with a perfect trip, and they're asking an awful lot of a horse that's never won a race.
They are. I guess you could reach back to a horse like Nolan's Cat, who I remember running in this race as a maiden with some decent speed figures. I think he ran 3rd in the Belmont, but it feels like a reach to me. He'd have to take a big step forward off that 112 TimeformUS speed figure, and this is a tough spot to try to do that.
You know, you brought up that point I was making about Dornoch, Craig. If you liked him in the Kentucky Derby, you're supposed to give him another chance. I didn't. I did like the number 8 Honor Marie in the Kentucky Derby, and I think you had some interest in him as well. And I just don't think we got a true line on where he fits against these top 3-year-olds that day, because if Dornoch had the worst trip, Honor Marie probably had the second worst trip in the Kentucky Derby. Yes, he was going to be towards the back of the pack early anyway. He is a deep closing type, but you still don't want to get pinballed around at the start like he was at the beginning of that race. That can really throw a horse off, and he encountered more trouble thereafter, got steadied into the clubhouse turn, had to work through inside of horses around the far turn and ankle out at that point. So things just really did not break in his favor in the Kentucky Derby. I did think he ran well too back in the Louisiana Derby, only finishing a length behind Catching Freedom. We've seen Catching Freedom come back and since validate that Louisiana Derby for him. So maybe Honor Marie's going to be capable of better in this Belmont Stakes.
I expect him to run much better. And like you said, unlike Dornoch, if I put a line through his Kentucky Derby, I do like him in here. He will have to take a step forward speed figure wise, but he figures to get some pace in here, a much cleaner trip. So I think he's pretty dangerous closing.
The likely favorite in this Belmont Stakes is the number 9, Sierra Leone. And I think the best asset this horse has, Craig, is his consistency. He just shows up every time. He's just a couple noses shy of being undefeated. He doesn't always win by the biggest margins, but he's consistently putting in that strong late rally, albeit while lugging him through the stretch. I think we've seen that from him in just about every start. And if you have concerns about Sierra Leone, one of the concerns might be that he sometimes is his own worst enemy at the ends of his races, trying to lean on foes, lug in. They're changing the bit for this race to try to give the jockey more control, a jockey switch from Tyler Gaffalione to Flavien Prat. Do you think that's going to fix the issues, Craig, or do you still have some concerns about Sierra Leone's antics?
I definitely have concerns. I mean, I think Chad Brown is just trying to do what he can to get this horse to run straight in the stretch, but he's going to be a short price. You have 9 to 5. I won't be surprised if he's even 7 to 5 by the time they open the gate. And he can win this race. He's the most likely winner. But I have those concerns, and at a short price, I wouldn't pick a horse like this on top. He's not really any faster than several in here on the TimeformUS speed figures, but don't mistake that for me thinking he's not super dangerous in here. I'd even argue his best race might have been his Risen Star, where he had absolutely no pace that day and was still able to run down a horse like Track Phantom, who was in top form at the time. So he's very good. It's just a matter of how short of a price do you want to take, given the concerns with how he behaves.
Easily the biggest wild card in this Belmont Stakes field is the number 10 Mind Frame. He's really bucking a lot of history, Craig, coming into this race off just 2 starts, making his stakes debut in a Triple Crown event. That's something we almost never see. This race being a mile and a quarter does sort of invite a horse like him to maybe try the race, whereas it might have been way too daunting if it were a mile and a half. There's no doubt this horse has serious talent. We saw it on debut on the Florida Derby undercard when he won by nearly 14 lengths with a huge speed figure. And then last time, didn't run quite as fast, didn't really have to, got to set a slow pace, was just superior to that field. But they're asking an awful lot of this horse to step up against by far the toughest group that he's ever encountered.
It really is asking a lot for a horse this young and this lightly raced. And it may seem crazy. I might actually prefer him a little bit more if the race was a mile and a half at its usual distance and a mile and a quarter. I think he'd have more time to relax. It's just a lot. And if this horse was 10 or 12 to 1, sure, I could see just banking on the ability that he has shown so far. But to take what's going to be a, second, maybe third choice in here at the best, that just seems like a lot for a horse who just hasn't done it against good horses so far.
Well, let's throw up our picks for this Belmont Stakes. And I think we're both taking horses coming out of the Kentucky Derby, Craig, going in slightly different directions. You're going to give a shot to the number 2 Resilience.
Yeah, I just think he's going to offer some real value because that Kentucky Derby running line just doesn't really represent to me how good he ran in that race. I do think there's some other horses better in here so far, but he's a horse who had just been progressing every single time out. And with Bill Mott at the helm, I think he's going to take another step forward and be very dangerous.
And I see you don't really disagree with my top pick. I'm giving another chance to the number 8, Honor Marie. I liked him a little bit heading into the Kentucky Derby. Just don't think we got a true line on his ability that day. I like that he's coming back for this, reportedly trading well, having skipped the Preakness. I think we're going to see a much better performance from Honor Marie at this occasion at what I do think is going to be a fair price. I've also got the number 1, Seize the Gray in there. Don't want to view his Preakness as just a total fluke. Sometimes Dwayne Lucas gets these horses moving in the right direction at the right time. We both have Sierra Leone third. Won't be surprised if he wins. Just don't see the value. I think both Craig and I agree on that. For the Belmont Stakes this weekend, everybody, good luck playing the races at the Belmont Stakes Racing Festival this weekend.